I'm 31 male, and I've always prided myself on being someone who works hard for what he has. I didn't grow up with much, so I learned early on to save every dime, make sacrifices, and plan for the future. For years, I've been putting aside money for a down payment on a house, a place of my own, free of roommates, and something that I could call mine. But as I'm about to explain, that dream turned into a nightmare when my own brother tried to destroy everything I had worked for. It started about 6 months ago when my older brother, 34, called me in a panic. We've always had a complicated relationship. He's the type who expects the world to hand him what he wants, while I've always believed in earning it. Still, he's my brother, and I've bailed him out of trouble more times than I can count. This time it was different. He claimed he was behind on rent and about to be evicted. He needed $2,000 to avoid being thrown out. I hesitated. Over the years, I had lent him money dozens of times. He rarely paid me back, and when he did, it was like pulling teeth. But he sounded desperate, so I caved. I sent him the money with the understanding that he'd repay me within 2 months. He promised this time would be different. I didn't fully believe him, but I figured I could afford to help one last time. Weeks passed, then months. I kept asking about the money, and he kept dodging the question. Next week, I promise. I just need a little more time. I've been struggling. The excuses piled up. I should have seen it coming, but what happened next blindsided me completely. One morning, I logged into my savings account to check the balance, and my heart stopped. It was empty. Every single dollar I had saved, $650,000, was gone. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. I called the bank, frantic, and that's when they told me something that made my blood run cold. The money had been transferred to another account using my login credentials. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. My brother had stolen my life savings. I was furious, but I was also confused. How did he even get access to my account? That's when I remembered. A few months earlier, he had borrowed my laptop. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I must have had my banking information saved. He must have seen it and written it down. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. My own brother, someone I had helped so many times, had gone behind my back and taken everything I had worked for. I called him immediately, shaking with anger. "What the hell did you do?" I demanded. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he acted like he was the victim. "I had no choice," he said. "I needed the money more than you did. You're doing fine, and I'm drowning. You stole from me?" I yelled. "That wasn't your money to take." He had the audacity to act offended. "You're my brother," he shot back. "Family is supposed to help each other. You've been hoarding all that money while I've been struggling. I thought you'd understand." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. My first instinct was to go to the police, but I hesitated. He's my brother. Did I really want to ruin his life? But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. He didn't just take a little bit of money. He took everything, and he didn't even apologize. If the roles were reversed, he wouldn't have hesitated to throw me under the bus. Why should I protect him? So, I did what I had to do. I went to the police and filed a report. The police took my statement and asked for all the evidence I had. I provided bank records, texts between my brother and me, and anything else that could help. They assured me they would investigate, but I could tell they didn't see this as a high-priority case. Meanwhile, I reached out to an attorney for advice on recovering my money. He explained that because my brother used my credentials to access the account, it might complicate things legally. "It's not a clear-cut theft case," he said, "but with the evidence, we can build a strong argument." It was weeks before anything happened. During that time, my brother had the nerve to call me several times, alternating between anger and self-pity. One day, he'd be screaming at me for going to the police. "You're really going to ruin my life over money," he'd say. The next, he'd be crying and begging me to drop the case. "We're family. Please don't do this." I ignored him. I didn't trust myself to talk to him without losing it. He clearly thought he could guilt me into backing down, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it. A month later, the police called. They had enough evidence to move forward, and they arrested him. He was charged with theft, identity fraud, and unauthorized access to a financial account. When he found out, he went ballistic. He showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door and yelling loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I didn't let him in, but I recorded everything on my phone. He screamed about how I was ruining his life and called me every name in the book. "You think you're so perfect, but you're nothing without me," he shouted. After that, I filed for a restraining order. I wasn't taking any chances. My brother had crossed every possible line, and I wasn't about to let him intimidate me into dropping the charges. The case dragged on for months, but I stayed firm. My brother tried everything to avoid taking responsibility. First, he claimed I had given him permission to use the money. When that didn't work, he blamed his financial troubles, saying he was desperate and had no other choice. At one point, he even accused me of being the bad guy, claiming I was trying to destroy him out of spite. His entitlement knew no bounds. He hired an attorney who argued that I was being vindictive and punishing him for being in a tough spot. The fact that he had stolen $65,000 was almost treated like a minor detail. I sat in court, listening to his lies, and I couldn't believe how far he was willing to go to avoid accountability. But I had my own attorney, and he was ready. We presented the evidence, the bank records, the text messages, and even the recording of him screaming outside my apartment. My lawyer pointed out that this wasn't about desperation. It was about entitlement. My brother didn't ask for help. He took what he wanted because he thought he was owed it. The judge agreed. My brother was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and was ordered to pay me back every penny he stole. But even then, he didn't give up. A week after the sentencing, I found out he had called our parents, crying about how I had ruined his life. They called me, begging me to forgive him and drop the restitution order. "He's your brother," my mom said. "Can't you just let this go?" I lost it. "Let it go." I snapped. "He stole $65,000 from me. He didn't even apologize. He doesn't think he did anything wrong. And now you're asking me to just forget it?" "It's just money," my dad said quietly. "It's not just money," I said. "It's my future. He didn't just steal from me. He betrayed me. And the fact that you're defending him makes it worse." They didn't know what to say after that. For the first time, I realized just how deep my brother's manipulation went. He had our parents wrapped around his finger, convincing them he was the victim. But I wasn't going to let him control me anymore. As satisfying as the guilty verdict was, my brother's entitled antics didn't stop there. About a month after he started serving his sentence, I got a call from one of his friends, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, my brother had been whining about how unfair everything was and asked this guy to pressure me into dropping the restitution order. "You know, he's family," the friend said over the phone. "You could really help him out. He's going through enough as it is." I nearly laughed out loud. "Let me get this straight," I replied. "He steals my life savings, lies about it, tries to blame me, and now I'm supposed to feel sorry for him? No. He can face the consequences of his actions like an adult." The friend sputtered some nonsense about how my brother had learned his lesson and deserved another chance, but I hung up before he could finish. I wasn't going to let anyone guilt me into backing down. My brother had relied on me bailing him out his whole life, and this time, he was on his own. What surprised me most, though, was how this whole ordeal started revealing long-buried truths about my family. My parents had always been lenient with my brother, making excuses for his behavior while holding me to a much higher standard. Growing up, he could slack off, skip chores, and break rules without facing any real consequences. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, picking up the slack and making sacrifices. That dynamic didn't magically change when we became adults. My brother spent his 20s bouncing from job to job, racking up debt, and leaning on everyone around him for support. My parents covered his bills, lent him money, and even let him move back in multiple times. But when I asked for help, like the time I needed a small loan to cover unexpected car repairs, they told me I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. I had brushed it off for years, telling myself it wasn't worth causing drama. But now I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just about my brother's theft. It was about the toxic family dynamic that had enabled him to think he could get away with it. A few weeks after his sentencing, I sat down with my parents and laid everything out. "I'm done being the fallback guy," I told them. "I've spent my whole life cleaning up his messes, and it stops now. If you want to keep enabling him, that's your choice, but I'm not going to be part of it." My dad looked uncomfortable, but my mom got defensive. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said. He's your brother. Family is supposed to stick together. No, I said firmly. Family is supposed to support each other, not take advantage of each other. If the roles were reversed, would you be telling him to forgive me? Or would you be calling me irresponsible and selfish? That shut her up. For the first time, I think they really started to understand how much damage my brother's actions and their enabling had caused. Months later, my life finally started getting back to normal. I worked with my attorney to set up a repayment plan for the stolen money. And while it'll take years for my brother to pay it all back, I take comfort in knowing that he's being held accountable. I've also started rebuilding my savings, and though it's been slow going, I'm more determined than ever to achieve my goals. As for my relationship with my brother, it's practically non-existent. He's still bitter about the whole situation and hasn't shown any real remorse. But honestly, that's his problem, not mine. I've spent too much of my life putting his needs before my own, and I'm done letting him drag me down. The experience taught me a hard but valuable lesson. Just because someone is family doesn't mean they're entitled to your trust or your forgiveness. Sometimes the best thing you can do is set boundaries and stand your ground, no matter how much it hurts. If you enjoyed reading about how I turned the tables on my entitled brother, hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty more stories to share about family drama, life lessons, and what happens when you finally stand up for yourself. Stay tuned.